Hello, good afternoon, friends. This is Dr. Paresh Rawat, and I am going to present a presentation on topic cognitive radios. Dear students, this is the topic covered by your fourth unit, and I am sharing this topic on behalf of the content covered in your course curriculum of Advanced Communication System. Uh, the contents the contents which we will be covering here is the introduction, the cognitive radio, what are the cognitive radios, and a small introduction of the spectrum sharing will be shared in this part of video. Okay, so the first thing to begin with the session is that why is the requirement of the cognitive radio is there. As we all know that the bandwidth conservation is the biggest problem faced by the entire world today. So the energy efficiency is the goal to reduce the amount of energy required and utilized by the network providers. Basically, why it is required to reduce the energy, because as we all know that the demand is increasing day by day, and the energy, if we design the system by the less amount of energy, then by the 2050 we can reduce the overall energy consumption by around 1/3. So that is the demand. And secondly, by using the energy efficient system designing, we can reduce the cost effectiveness in the future, and saving the energy of the spectrum and the data transmission will also try to save the human health in the future, as the electromagnetic field intensity is increasing day by day. Now, to begin with, let us classify the various types of wireless communication systems. It is classified into three parts. Now, the very important part of the wireless communication systems are point-to-point communication, which is cellular communication, where we are actually being transmitting from mobile to mobile. The next is multi-point communication, which is the broadband between the multiple users. And the next one is the very important one, which is the broadcast communication, which is the case of the radio service providers or wireless service providers. So we are focusing for the third part here, because most of the cognitive radio systems are actually being developed for the radio service networks. Now, what are the challenges while we are actually been dealing with wireless communication systems? Because these all challenges will be dealt by the cognitive radio system solutions. First one is, as we have already discussed, that more and more data transmission, more speed, more bandwidth is required. That means the more demand is there. Second is, if as much as the demand is increasing, it will be causing an interference. There will be two types of interference which we have already studied. One is co-channel interference and one is inter-symbol interference. Next is the spectrum is limited, as we have already discussed, because the spectrum is provided by the International Frequency Registration Board to you all. Next is inefficient spectrum utilization. That is a very big concern, and that is the basic requirement which creates the space for cognitive radio system designs, because the already available spectrums which are allocated to primary users is not fully occupied. We will be discussing it furthermore. So therefore, inefficient spectrum utilizations is the motivation to on the backside of the cognitive radio system development. Next is call drops and handoffs. Of course, inefficient spectrum utilization will cause us to reduce the power utilization, and it will be causing call drops efficiencies. So that can be improved by cognitive radio system solutions. All the frequency bands are licensed to specific services. No violation is allowed. Okay, so these frequencies are allocated to all service providers by the frequency allocation boards. like IFRC, FCC, Federation Communication. And what are the solutions to all these problems? The solution to all these problems are the energy efficient cognitive radio system design. Let us move ahead towards the system. As we have already discussed, dear students, that the spectrum is inefficiently utilized. Now here we are actually dealing with a case in the bottom of the slide where we are showing on the vertical scale it is the power label, and on the horizontal scale it is the frequency availability. So the entire frequency band is rarely utilized. There are various holes which are actually been called as spectrum holes, Now these all different spectrum holes where the power level is reduced significantly are free to use, but they are not actually been allocated. So the most of the spectrum allocated to the primary service user providers is not utilized fully. Therefore it creates a requirement of utilizing these. If we are capable of utilizing these spectrum holes efficiently, then we are able to increase the energy efficiency of the networks. Now there is another case on this particular case where it is a case of an spectrum allocation of New York, Washington DC city. Now the green part which is actually been there for 3 different hours are the free available spectrums. So we can see that the spectrum, spatial and temporal spectrum uses plots. Now here we can see that the spectral uses measurement indicates that spectrum is not used at all times. The blue regions and that the uses of the green regions depends on the location. Now the cognitive radio have the potential to jump in and out of an used spectrum gaps to increase the spectrum efficiency and to provide the wideband services. So therefore, dear friends, dear students, the goal of cognitive radio is to share these spectrums and allocating the secondary users the spaces which are free in the spectrum at a particular time instant. So first goal is to identify the spectrum holes. The second goal is allocate these spectrum holes to the secondary user service providers. So that is what called as spectrum utilization may vary with time. Okay, so now is that clear? The next is, what is cognitive radio? The several definitions of the cognitive radios are there, but in general the cognitive radio is a radio that is aware of its surroundings and it adapts intelligently and can change its transmitter parameters based on the interaction with the environment in which it is operating. That means the cognitive radios are implemented on the primary user spectrum, and first thing is it adopts the spectrum holes, and then those spectrum holes are allocated to the service provider of the cognitive radio networks of the secondary users. That is why it is adaptively and intelligently taken care. Okay, so the cognitive radios can improve spectrum utilizations by allowing secondary users, that is cognitive radios, to borrow unused spectrum from the primary user licensed users. So as we have already discussed, who are the primary users? The primary users are the users which are actually been allocated the license bands, and cognitive radios are the radios which are actually secondary users which are actually utilizing the spectrum holes of the primary users to provide the services without using any other band to increase the energy efficiency. Why do we need cognitive radios? Very big question. The licensed and the primary users only like cellular service providers. Okay, so there are the primary users which are called as licensed users. we are running out of the space and higher frequencies has a problem. So that means the spectrums are already limited, and those spectrums are already allocated to certain primary users. So the free frequency bands in the space is rarely available, and it is rarely available below certain gigahertz, that around 3 gigahertz and below. So at higher frequency bands we cannot increase higher frequency bands, and beyond a certain higher frequency bands the free license bands are not available. Third is very important, we are underutilizing the license spaces. As we have already discussed, as you can see here also, the most of the time the power level is less, and these power levels which are very less are not being fully occupied. So it is my underutilization of license space. So what is cognitive radio is doing? Cognitive radio is allowed, uses, guarantees and interference free services, and it uses the fully utilization of underused license bands. So CR is capable of able to sense spectrum environment, able to provide opportunistic access, find gaps and spectrums, adjust system parameters to utilize it. Okay. Now there is a very big question which comes out to be when we are discussing about the cognitive radio system, that is called as hidden terminal problem. What is hidden terminal problem? Now this can be very easily understood by these two sentences. First is, it occurs when the cognitive radio is shadowed. That means there are the primary user, there are the secondary user, and when the power level of the secondary users are shadowed by the primary users, then it is called as hidden terminal problem. In severe multipath fading or inside buildings with high penetration losses, while a primary user is operating in vicinity. So whenever the primary user is operating in the vicinity with multipath propagation, it is a probability that secondary user is being shadowed by the primary user. This problem is called as hidden terminal problem. Due to hidden terminal problem, cognitive radio may not notice presence of primary user and access the licensed channel and cause interference. So what it means that sometimes in the presence of the primary user is being shadowed, and it is not been identified by the cognitive radio system, and there will be interference between CR and primary users. So that is called as hidden terminal problem. What is the solution? The solution is to conduct spectrum sensing. The best way of spectrum sensing is the energy detection. By detecting the proper energy of the spectrum utilization, we can identify the spectrum holes, or we can sense spectrum holes. That will be covered in the next session. Thank you.